Billionaire pretended he only had 3 months to live. And when he saw his daughter's reaction, Howard Reynolds never imagined he would discover the truth about his daughters in the most painful way possible. The 74-year-old businessman had built a financial empire over 5 decades, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to discover about Victoria and Elizabeth. It all started when his private nurse, Anthony Miller, suggested a bold idea after witnessing yet another argument between the sisters about money. Howard had just received the results of his annual medical exams, all perfectly normal, when Anthony made the proposal that would change everything. "Mr. Howard, have you ever thought about pretending to be sick to see how they really behave?" asked Anthony, while organizing the medications on the silver tray. The millionaire stopped reading the newspaper and stared intently at the 35-year-old man who had been caring for him for 2 years. Anthony had become more than an employee. He was almost like the son he never had. "Do you think they only care about my money?" questioned Howard, though deep down he already knew the answer. "Sir, I only say what I see every day. Your daughters only show up here when there are meetings with lawyers, or when you mention changes to the will." The truth hurt, but Howard couldn't deny it. Victoria, 32, and Elizabeth, 29, had always been distant. Even though they lived in the same city of New York City, they rarely visited him at his mansion in the Upper East Side. Anthony continued arranging the medicines while speaking. "My mother always said that money doesn't buy character. It only reveals who a person really is inside." Howard closed the newspaper and became thoughtful. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years ago, a victim of a heart problem. Since then, he felt increasingly alone in that huge house, surrounded only by employees. "And how do you suggest I do this?" asked the patriarch, curious about the nurse's proposal. "You could invent a serious illness. I know a trustworthy doctor who could help with fake exams. It would just be to see their reaction." The idea was risky, but Howard was tired of living in doubt. He needed to know if his daughters loved him, or were just waiting for his inheritance. That same afternoon, Anthony called Dr. Richard Parker, an old friend who worked at Mount Sinai Hospital. The doctor initially resisted the idea, but ended up agreeing to help when Anthony explained the situation. "This is completely irregular, Anthony, but I understand your employer's pain," said the doctor over the phone. "Doctor, he just wants to know the truth about his daughters. It won't harm anyone." 3 days later, Dr. Richard arrived at the mansion with a folder full of fictitious exams. Howard was nervous, but determined to discover the truth. "Mr. Reynolds, based on the results, I have difficult news to share," said the doctor, getting into character. Anthony stood beside the wheelchair that Howard used only as a precaution after a minor fall months ago. The businessman gripped the arms of the chair tightly. "Just say it, doctor. I'm not a child for you to hide the truth from me. You have a rare liver disease. Based on the exams, I believe we have at most 3 months." The silence in the room was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock that Margaret had bought on a trip to Europe. Howard pretended to be in shock, though inside he was anxious to begin the test. 3 months, he repeated, with the trembling voice he had mentally rehearsed. "Unfortunately, yes. The disease is very advanced. There are experimental treatments abroad, but they are expensive and without guarantee of success." Anthony watched everything in silence, impressed with his employer's acting. Howard really looked like a man who had just received a life sentence. "Doctor, are you absolutely sure?" asked Howard, with tears in his eyes that he managed to produce by thinking about how much he missed his wife. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Reynolds. I'll leave some medications to improve your comfort and return next week to monitor your progress. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. After the doctor left, Howard and Anthony were alone in the living room. The businessman took a handkerchief from his pocket and dried his eyes, returning to normal. "Now let's see what my daughters are made of," he murmured, with a mix of sadness and determination. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Anthony, beginning to have doubts about the plan. "Anthony, I need to know. I can't die one day without being sure if they truly love me." That night, Howard called Victoria, his oldest daughter. She worked as a marketing manager at a cosmetics company and always seemed too busy for long conversations. Dad, what a surprise. You never call after 8, said Victoria, with the hurried voice of someone doing multiple things at once. Daughter, I need you and Elizabeth to come here tomorrow. I have something important to discuss with you. Dad, tomorrow is Friday. I have an important presentation at work. Can it be on the weekend? Howard felt a pang in his chest. Even pretending to be fine, his daughter's coldness hurt him. Victoria, it's urgent. Please, I need both of you here at 2 in the afternoon. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Howard could hear the noise of the television and people talking in the background. All right, Dad, but I hope it's really important. I'll call Carol and let her know too. Thank you, daughter. See you tomorrow. The next morning, Anthony arrived early to prepare everything. They had agreed that the nurse would be present during the entire conversation to observe the ladies' reactions. Mr. Reynolds, are you prepared for this? Asked Anthony, while arranging the fake medications on the coffee table. I don't know if anyone can be prepared to discover that their own children are greedy, but I need to know the truth. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Anthony went to answer and found the 2 sisters at the door. Victoria wore an elegant navy blue pantsuit and carried a designer purse. Elizabeth was more casual, with a floral dress and high-heeled sandals. Good afternoon, Anthony. Is Daddy okay? Asked Elizabeth, seeming genuinely concerned. He's in the living room waiting for you. Make yourselves comfortable. The 2 entered the spacious living room of the mansion. Howard was sitting in his wheelchair near the unlit fireplace, with a blanket over his legs, and the fake test results on the table beside him. Dad, you look terrible, exclaimed Victoria, quickly approaching. Could it be some kind of flu? Have you been taking the vitamins the doctor prescribed? Asked Elizabeth, sitting on the leather sofa next to her father. Howard took a deep breath. It was time to begin the performance that would define his family's future. Girls, I called you here because I received the results of some tests I took last week. The 2 exchanged glances with apparent concern. Anthony stood near the window, observing every detail of their expressions. Dr. Parker discovered that I have a rare liver disease. According to him, I only have 3 months to live. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria brought her hand to her mouth, pretending to be in shock. Elizabeth began to cry, but her tears seemed forced like those of a bad actress. Dad, this can't be right, shouted Victoria. You need to get more tests, see other doctors. I've already confirmed with 2 specialists. There's nothing more to be done. Elizabeth wiped her tears with a tissue she took from her purse. Dad, what about your assets? Have you thought about getting things in order? The question hit Howard Reynolds like a punch to the gut. It hadn't even been 5 minutes since they'd learned about his supposed illness, and Elizabeth was already talking about inheritance. Liz, Victoria scolded. How can you think about that at a time like this? But Anthony noticed Victoria didn't seem genuinely outraged. It was more like she was scolding her sister for asking the question too soon. Sorry, Dad. It's just that I worry about these practical things. I don't want you to have to worry about it later. Howard pretended to understand. Don't worry. I already have everything organized with my lawyer, Dr. Williamson. The eyes of both daughters subtly lit up upon hearing the family lawyer's name. Anthony noticed the reaction and exchanged a meaningful look with his boss. Dad, are you sure there's no treatment? Asked Victoria. I read about clinics in Switzerland that work miracles with rare diseases. The doctor said there is an experimental treatment in the United Kingdom, but it costs over $1 million and there are no guarantees. Elizabeth visibly perked up. $1 million? Dad, that's nothing compared to what you have. You need to try. No, my dear. I prefer to stay here at home, in the place I built with your mother. If it's my time to go, I want to go in peace. The 2 exchanged another look. Anthony could almost see the gears turning in their minds. Dad, but you can't just give up like that, insisted Victoria. Think of us, of how we'll manage without you. The words sounded hollow, as if she were reading from a poorly rehearsed script. Howard felt a deep sadness in his chest. His suspicions were being confirmed faster than he expected. What if we sold the mansion? Suggested Elizabeth suddenly. It would bring in more than enough to pay for the treatment. Elizabeth, exclaimed Victoria, pretending to be scandalized. What? It's a practical idea. Dad can buy another smaller house after he's cured. Howard pretended to consider the suggestion. I've thought about that, but this house has too much sentimental value. It's where you grew up, where your mother was happy. Dad, we can always buy another house. You are irreplaceable, said Elizabeth, with a sweetness that sounded completely false. Anthony had to control himself to not make a face of disgust. The young lady's acting was terrible. Let me think about it, said Howard. Now, I need to rest. Anthony, can you see the girls to the door? The two reluctantly stood up. Victoria gave her father a kiss on the cheek, and Elizabeth did the same. Dad, if you need anything, just call, said Victoria. Yeah, Dad. We're here for you no matter what, added Elizabeth. After his daughters left, Anthony returned to the living room and found Howard with his head in his hands. So, sir? What did you think? Worse than I imagined, Anthony. Elizabeth was already talking about inheritance before she'd even processed the news of the illness. And the suggestion to sell the house couldn't be more obvious. They want me to spend my own money on treatment so there's less inheritance to split later. Anthony sat in the armchair opposite his boss. Do you want to stop here or continue testing? Let's continue. I need to be absolutely sure before I make any decisions about my will. That night, Howard could barely sleep. He kept thinking about where he'd gone wrong in raising his daughters. He remembered how Margaret always warned him about giving them too much money without demanding responsibility in return. You're going to raise two spoiled people with no character, his wife used to say. Howard always thought she was exaggerating, but now he was beginning to realize Margaret was right. The next day, a Saturday, both daughters showed up unannounced at the mansion. Anthony answered the door and was surprised by the unexpected visit. Good morning, Anthony. We came to see how Dad spent the night, said Victoria, carrying a basket of expensive fruits. We brought some sweets he likes, added Elizabeth, showing a box of imported chocolates. Anthony led them to the living room where Howard Reynolds was having breakfast in his wheelchair. The businessman pretended to be pleased with the surprise visit. What a joy to see you both here. I wasn't expecting visitors today. Dad, we were worried yesterday after we left, said Victoria, placing the basket on the coffee table. It's true. We barely slept thinking about you, added Elizabeth. Anthony noticed both were dressed more casually, but still in expensive clothes. Victoria wore a silk blouse and linen pants, while Elizabeth had on a designer dress and luxury shoes. Dad, we've been talking, began Victoria. We want to hire a 24-hour nurse to take care of you. You don't need to worry about that. Anthony takes very good care of me. But Dad, Anthony needs to rest too, insisted Elizabeth, and a nurse specialized in palliative care would be better. The expression palliative care made Howard shudder internally. They already considered him a lost cause. How much would this nurse cost, he asked, testing his daughters. That doesn't matter, Dad, Victoria replied quickly. What's important is your comfort. Actually, I looked into it, and it's not that expensive, said Elizabeth. I found a clinic that offers caregivers at a very affordable price. Anthony noticed Elizabeth was holding a folded piece of paper in her purse. He suspected she had researched prices for cheap nursing homes, not expensive private nurses. Let me think about it, said Howard. Now tell me how you both are. It's been so long since we talked about your lives. The two seemed uncomfortable with the change of subject. Oh, Dad, everything's normal. Work, appointments, you know how it is, Victoria answered vaguely. And you, Elizabeth? How's the interior design course going? Fine, fine. Nothing much to report. It was obvious neither wanted to talk about themselves. They were there with a specific purpose. Dad, returning to the house matter, said Elizabeth, unable to contain herself. I spoke with a realtor yesterday. Victoria gave her sister a discreet elbow nudge, but the damage was done. You did what? Asked Howard, feigning surprise. Sorry, Dad, I just wanted to get an idea of the market value, just to know. And how much would it be worth? The realtor said that, given the size and location, the house is worth at least $15 million. Elizabeth's eyes sparkled as she mentioned the amount. Howard realized she had already mentally calculated how much she would inherit. $15 million would be more than enough for your treatment, and there would still be plenty left, said Victoria, trying to sound convincing. "And where would I live afterwards?" "Dad, you could buy a beautiful apartment in Soho, much more practical for your age," suggested Elizabeth. Anthony had to leave the room to avoid showing his indignation. He was listening to them talk about evicting their own father from his home as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'll think about it," repeated Howard. "Now I need to take my medication and rest a bit." The daughters said goodbye with forced kisses and promises to return soon. After they left, Anthony returned to the living room visibly irritated. "Mr. Reynolds, this is making me angry. How can they be so insensitive?" "Calm down, Anthony. We're not finished yet. I want to see how far they're willing to go." "Did you notice Elizabeth had already spoken with a realtor even before knowing about the illness?" "I did notice. And I bet she wasn't researching expensive nurses. That paper she hid in her purse must be from some cheap nursing home." Anthony shook his head sadly. "How can people be so greedy with their own father? My wife always said I was raising them wrong. I gave too much money and too little attention. Maybe it's my fault too." "Sir, you were always a good father. You paid for the best schools, colleges, gave them everything they needed. But maybe I gave them everything they wanted, not what they needed. They never learned the value of things." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The following Monday, Howard received an unexpected call from Dr. Williamson, his lawyer for over 20 years. "Howard, your daughters came to see me. They said you're very sick and want to know about your will. They went to see you. I didn't ask them to do that." "I know you didn't. That's why I'm calling. They asked very specific questions about values and division of assets. I thought it was strange." Howard felt a cold anger rising in his chest. His daughters had gone behind his back to see the lawyer. What exactly did they ask? Victoria wanted to know if you had any accounts overseas. Elizabeth asked if there's any clause in the will about medical care that could affect the inheritance. "And what did you tell them?" "That I only discuss these matters with you present. But I confess I was worried about their behavior." Howard thanked the lawyer and hung up the phone with his hands shaking with anger. Anthony, who had overheard the conversation, approached worriedly. "Mr. Howard, are you all right? You've gone pale." "They went after my lawyer, Anthony. Not even a week has passed since they found out about the illness, and they're already investigating my inheritance." "That's terrible. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep testing them. I want to see how far this greed goes." That afternoon, the two daughters showed up again. This time they seemed more anxious and less theatrical in their displays of concern. "Dad, we've been thinking," Victoria began as soon as they sat down. "You urgently need to organize your documents." "What documents?" "Power of attorney, will, bank accounts. In case you become more debilitated, someone needs to handle these things." Elizabeth nodded vigorously. "It's true, Daddy. What if you're hospitalized? Who will pay the bills, take care of the staff?" Howard pretended he hadn't thought of that. "You're right, but my lawyer handles all that." "Dad, but Dr. Williamson is very old. What if something happens to him too?" questioned Victoria. "That's why we think it would be better for one of us to have power of attorney for emergencies," Elizabeth finished. Anthony, who was organizing medications on a nearby table, almost dropped a bottle upon hearing the suggestion. "You want me to give power of attorney to one of you?" "It's not that we want it, Dad. It's a precaution," said Victoria. "Imagine if you faint and need expensive surgery. Someone has to authorize the expenses quickly. And which one of you would take on that responsibility?" The two exchanged glances. It was obvious they had already discussed this between themselves. "We could take turns," suggested Elizabeth, "or each one handles a different part." "What parts?" "I could handle the bank accounts," Victoria said quickly. "And I could handle the properties and investments," Elizabeth finished. Howard almost let out a bitter laugh. They had already divided his assets between themselves. "I need to think about this. It's a very important decision." "Of course, Dad, but don't take too long. Every day that passes is one day less to get everything in order," said Victoria, with a coldness that made Howard shudder. After they left, Anthony sat down heavily in an armchair. Mr. Howard, they just suggested dividing control of all your assets while you're still alive. I noticed, and it seems they've already decided who gets what. Are you going to give them the power of attorney? Absolutely not, but I'll pretend I'm considering it. I want to see what else they come up with. The next morning, Howard woke up with an idea. He called Anthony very early. Anthony, I want you to spread a rumor among the staff. What kind of rumor, sir? Tell them you overheard me talking on the phone about a secret account in Switzerland. Something about $10 million that even my lawyer doesn't know about. Are you sure, sir? The girls will go crazy over this information. That's exactly what I want. Let's see how far they'll go. Anthony followed the order and spread the rumor among the cook, the gardener, and the housekeeper. He knew the information would reach Howard's daughters within hours. It didn't take long. On Wednesday, Victoria called her father, sounding very agitated. Dad, I need to talk to you urgently. Can I come over now? Of course, my dear. Did something happen? It's better we talk in person. An hour later, Victoria arrived accompanied by Elizabeth. Both seemed nervous and anxious. Dad, we heard you have an account in Switzerland, said Victoria directly, without beating around the bush. Howard pretended to be surprised and a little irritated. Who told you that? That doesn't matter. What matters is we need to know the details of this account, said Elizabeth. Why? Dad, if something happens to you, how will we access this money? Asked Victoria. And to pay for your treatment, you need to transfer the money to the United States, added Elizabeth. Howard was taken aback by their audacity. That account is for emergencies. I haven't touched it in years. But, Daddy, your illness is an emergency, insisted Elizabeth. $10 million would be more than enough to pay for any treatment in the world. How do you know it's $10 million? The two were embarrassed for a few seconds. Oh, someone mentioned it. I don't remember who, stammered Victoria. Dad, the important thing is for you to give us the account information, said Elizabeth, trying to change the subject. I won't give that information to anyone. When I'm gone, my lawyer will handle everything. But, Dad, what if you become unconscious? How will we pay the doctors? Asked Victoria, almost shouting in frustration. I have enough money here in the United States for any medical emergency. The two left visibly irritated. Anthony, who had watched the entire conversation, shook his head in disbelief. Mr. Howard, they are completely losing their composure. They don't even pretend to care about your health anymore. It's true, they only talk about money, accounts, and inheritance. They didn't even ask how I felt today, or if I needed anything. Do you regret starting this? Howard was thoughtful for a few moments. No, Anthony. I'd rather know the painful truth than live in a comfortable lie. On Friday, Howard had an even bolder idea. He called his daughters, asking them to come for a family dinner. Girls, it's been a long time since we had dinner together. I want you here Sunday at 7. Dad, Sunday is Valentine's Day. I already have plans, complained Elizabeth. And I made plans to go out with some friends, said Victoria. Please, this might be the last time we have a family dinner together, said Howard, feigning a weak and sad voice. That sentence had the desired effect. The two agreed to cancel their plans to be with their father. On Sunday, Anthony helped Howard set up a perfect trap. They spread some fake documents on the office table, including a provisional will that left the house to a supposed new wife. Anthony, place this paper about marriage contracts right in plain sight. I want to see their reaction. Are you sure, sir? This might be too cruel. They were cruel to me first. Now I want to see if they care about me or just the money. The daughters arrived promptly at 7. They were elegantly dressed, but clearly upset about having cancelled their plans. Hi, Dad, how are you feeling? Asked Victoria mechanically, giving her father a kiss on the cheek. A bit better today. Come, let's have dinner. During the meal prepared by the cook, Mrs. Rose, Howard noticed his daughters were eating quickly and seemed eager to leave. Dad, I need to leave early today. I have to work early tomorrow, said Elizabeth. And I promised my friend I'd stop by her place later, added Victoria. But you haven't even been here an hour. Can't we talk a bit? About what, Dad? Asked Elizabeth impatiently. About you, about life. When was the last time we talked about something other than illness or money? The two seemed uncomfortable with the question. Dad, it's just that we're worried about your situation. It's normal that we only talk about that, said Victoria. Maybe you're right. How about we go to my office? I want to show you some things. Their eyes lit up. The moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. In the office, Howard positioned himself strategically so his daughters would see the fake documents on the desk. Girls, come here. I want to talk about my will. The two approached quickly. Elizabeth was the first to notice the papers on the desk. Dad, what is this? She asked, pointing to the marriage contract document. Oh, that. I met a very kind lady at the hospital. Mrs. Patricia, 68 years old. She's also sick and has no family. Victoria grabbed the paper before her father could stop her. Marriage contract? Dad, are you thinking of getting married? We're talking about it. It would be nice to have someone to keep me company in these last months. But Dad, you don't even know this woman well, exclaimed Elizabeth. We've known each other for 3 weeks. She's a wonderful person, very caring and attentive. The two exchanged panicked glances. Dad, 3 weeks is too short a time for a decision like this, said Victoria, trying to sound rational. Sweetheart, with the time I have left, 3 weeks is an eternity. Elizabeth picked up the fake will from the desk and began to read. Dad, here it says you intend to leave the house to this Mrs. Patricia? She has nowhere to live after she leaves the hospital. I thought it would be an act of Christian charity. But Dad, this house is our family inheritance, shouted Victoria, completely losing her composure. Since when do you care about this house? Weren't you the ones who suggested selling it to pay for my treatment? The two were speechless for a few seconds. This is different, Dad. Selling is one thing. Giving it to a stranger is completely different, said Elizabeth. Mrs. Patricia is not a stranger. She's someone who genuinely cares about me. Dad, you're being manipulated, accused Victoria. This woman only wants your money. The irony of the situation almost made Howard laugh. His own daughters were accusing someone else of doing exactly what they themselves were doing. How can you be sure she only wants my money? He asked, testing them. Because it's obvious, replied Elizabeth. No one marries a sick person for love. So you think I don't deserve to be loved? The two realized they had said too much. That's not it, Dad. It's just that these situations are complicated, stammered Victoria. You're emotionally vulnerable, said Elizabeth. Opportunistic people know how to exploit that. Howard looked at his two daughters and felt a deep sadness. They were exactly what they were accusing Mrs. Patricia of being. I understand your concern, but I've made my decision. I'm marrying Mrs. Patricia next week. Dad, you can't do this, shouted Elizabeth, completely beside herself. Why can't I? Because... She began to cry, but they were tears of anger, not sadness. Because the family has to approve these decisions, said Victoria, trying to sound more controlled. The family? You two who only show up here when you want to talk about inheritance. Dad, that's not fair, protested Elizabeth. What's not fair? Me marrying someone who makes me happy, or you two being angry because you'll inherit less money? The silence that followed was awkward. The two had been exposed and knew it. Dad, we care about you, said Victoria, but her voice sounded empty. If you care, why do you never ask about my day? Why do you never stay more than an hour here? Why does every conversation always end up being about money? The two couldn't answer. Dad, if you get married, you'll ruin everything, exploded Elizabeth, showing her true nature. Ruin what, Elizabeth? The family harmony. What harmony? You barely speak to each other when you're here. Anthony, who was watching everything from the door, was impressed by the young lady's coldness. They really only cared about money. Dad, at least get to know this woman better before getting married, begged Victoria. And if I get to know her and still decide to marry, then you do what you want, she replied, but it was obvious she wasn't sincere. Great, then it's decided. I'll ask Mrs. Patricia to marry me tomorrow. The two left the office visibly shaken. During the goodbye, they could barely look their father in the eye. Dad, think carefully about what you're doing, said Elizabeth before leaving. Yes, Dad. Decisions made in haste often bring regret, added Victoria. After the daughters left, Anthony entered the office shaking his head. Mr. Howard, they became desperate. It's impressive how they dropped the mask. They saw they might lose part of the inheritance and showed who they really are. They didn't even try to pretend to care about my happiness. Are you really going to make up this, Mrs. Patricia? I'll hire an actress to play the part. I want to see how far they'll go to stop the wedding. Won't that be dangerous? Dangerous how? They won't hurt me physically. At most, they'll try to convince me to change my mind. And if they find out it's all a lie, then I'll reveal that my illness is also a lie and finally show who they really are. On Monday, Howard put his plan into action. Through contacts in the artistic community, he managed to hire Eleanor Wilson, a 68-year-old retired actress who agreed to play the role of Mrs. Patricia. Mrs. Eleanor, you just need to be affectionate and attentive to me in front of my daughters. Can you do that? Of course, my dear. I acted for 40 years. It won't be now that I'll forget how it's done. And what about the costume? Leave it to me. I'll dress like an elegant lady, but not too wealthy, neither too poor nor too rich. On Tuesday, Howard called his daughters. Girls, I want you to meet Mrs. Patricia. She's coming for dinner here tonight. Dad, wouldn't it be better if we met her first in private? Suggested Victoria. No, I prefer it to be a family gathering. Come at 7. The two arrived punctually, but were visibly tense. They wore conservative clothes and seemed prepared for a battle. At 7:30, Eleanor arrived dressed simply but elegantly. She wore a discreet navy blue dress and comfortable shoes. She carried a small leather purse and a bouquet of flowers from the garden. Howard, dear, I brought these flowers from my garden, said Eleanor, playing the part perfectly. Patricia, these are my daughters, Victoria and Elizabeth. What a joy to meet you. Howard talks so much about you too, said Eleanor with a genuine smile. The two greeted her coldly, analyzing every detail of their father's supposed suitor's appearance. During dinner, Eleanor was perfect in her role. He asked about the young lady's work, complimented the house's decoration, and showed genuine affection for Howard. Howard, did you take your afternoon medicine? Asked Eleanor, feigning concern. Not yet, my love. Could you get it for me? The term, my love, made Victoria choke on her food. Dad, are you two already using affectionate nicknames? She asked with a sharp voice. Daughter, when two people like each other, it's natural to show affection, replied Howard. Elizabeth noticed that Eleanor wasn't wearing expensive jewelry or designer clothes. This reassured her somewhat, as she imagined the woman didn't have much money of her own. Mrs. Patricia, where do you live? Asked Elizabeth, trying to sound casual. I have a simple little apartment in Chelsea, nothing too special, but it's cozy. And what do you do for work? I'm retired. I worked as an elementary school teacher for 40 years. Victoria and Elizabeth exchanged glances. A retired teacher definitely didn't have much money. And do you have children? Asked Victoria. Unfortunately, I wasn't blessed with children. That's why I'm so happy to meet you two. The answer made the sisters even more nervous. If Mrs. Patricia had no family, Howard would be her only source of support. Dad, can I speak with you in private? Asked Elizabeth. Not now, daughter. We're having dinner. It'll be quick, please. Howard sighed and apologized to Eleanor. In the hallway, away from the dining room, the two daughters confronted their father. Dad, this woman is a gold digger, whispered Victoria. Why? It's obvious. She has no money, no family. You're her salvation. And since when does having little money make someone a gold digger? Dad, you're being naive, said Elizabeth. She has her eyes on your fortune. How can you be so sure? Because we know these kinds of people, replied Victoria angrily. What people? Women who take advantage of rich, lonely men. Howard almost laughed at the irony. His daughters were describing exactly their own behavior. What if I say I don't care about her motivations? As long as she treats me well in my final months, I'm satisfied. Dad! They both exclaimed at the same time. You can't think like that, said Elizabeth. Why not? You only show up here when you want to talk about inheritance. At least she shows me affection. We show affection too, protested Victoria. When? When was the last time one of you asked how I was really doing? The two were left speechless. Dad, we love you, said Elizabeth. but her voice sounded false. Then prove it. Spend more time with me. Talk about things other than money. Show that you care about my happiness. Okay, Dad. We'll do that, said Victoria quickly. Great. Now let's go back to dinner before Patricia thinks you don't like her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. When they returned to the dining room, Eleanor was telling a funny story about her teaching days. Anthony, who was serving dinner, was genuinely smiling at the actress's anecdotes. And then the boy told his mother that the teacher had asked him to bring an imaginary pet, finished Eleanor, making everyone laugh except Victoria and Elizabeth. Patricia has a wonderful sense of humor, said Howard, holding her hand on the table. The daughters watched the gesture with poorly disguised disgust. It's true, said Anthony. Mrs. Patricia really brightens up the house when she's here. Anthony, you who live with Dad every day, what do you think of this situation? Asked Elizabeth, trying to gain an ally. I think your father deserves to be happy, Miss Elizabeth. Mrs. Patricia is a very special person. The response made the two even more irritated. Even the nurse was on the enemy's side. Dad, do you really intend to get married next week? Asked Victoria. Yes. I've already scheduled it with the judge for Friday. But Dad, this is so sudden, protested Elizabeth. My dear, with the time I have left, every day is precious. Eleanor held Howard's hand more firmly. Darling, if your daughters don't approve, perhaps we should wait a little longer. No, my love, we've already decided. If they truly love me, they'll want to see me happy. The awkward silence that followed was broken only by the sound of cutlery on the plates. Of course we want to see you happy, Dad, said Victoria through clenched teeth. Then it's settled. Friday at 2 in the afternoon at the courthouse. After dinner, the daughters quickly said their goodbyes. It was obvious they wanted to talk among themselves about the situation. It was a pleasure to meet you, said Eleanor, trying to give farewell kisses that were coldly returned. Likewise, murmured Elizabeth. I hope we'll be a happy family, added Victoria, but her tone suggested exactly the opposite. After everyone had left, Howard congratulated Eleanor on her performance. Mrs. Eleanor, you were perfect. They really believed it. Thank you, my dear. Your daughters are a bit hostile, aren't they? Unfortunately, yes, they only care about money. How sad. You seem like a wonderful father. I tried to be, but I think I failed somewhere in raising them. Anthony walked Eleanor to the gate and returned to find Howard thoughtful in the living room. And now, sir? What do you expect to happen? They'll try everything to stop this wedding. I want to see how far they'll go. What if they find out it's all an act? Then it will be time to reveal the whole truth, including about my supposed illness. Aren't you afraid they might never speak to you again? Howard was silent for a few moments. Anthony, after what I've seen these past few weeks, I'm not sure that would necessarily be a bad thing. The next morning, Howard woke up to the phone ringing insistently. It was Victoria, sounding desperate. Dad, I need to speak with you urgently. What's wrong, dear? It's about Mrs. Patricia. I found out some things about her. What things? I'd rather tell you in person. Can I come over now? Of course, but she'll be here at 10 to help choose the wedding menu. Wedding? Dad, cancel it, for heaven's sake. Why? I'll explain later. I'll be there in half an hour. Howard called Eleanor and asked her to arrive a bit later. He wanted to see what Victoria had discovered about Mrs. Patricia. When Victoria arrived, she was accompanied by Elizabeth and carried a folder full of papers. Dad, we hired a private detective to investigate Mrs. Patricia, said Victoria bluntly. You did what? It was for your protection, justified Elizabeth. And what did this detective find? Victoria opened the folder and took out several sheets. She's not who she says she is, Dad. Her real name is Eleanor Wilson. She's a retired actress. Howard pretended to be shocked. An actress? But she said she was a teacher. It was a lie. All lies, exclaimed Elizabeth. And there's more, continued Victoria. She's already married 2 wealthy men who were sick. Both died and left everything to her. Howard had to control himself not to laugh. The detective had invented a fantastic story about Eleanor. "This can't be true," he murmured, pretending to be shaken. "Dad, she's a black widow. She marries sick, wealthy men, waits for them to die, and takes the inheritance. But she seems so caring, so genuine. It's all an act, Dad. She's an actress. She knows how to perform," shouted Elizabeth. Howard held his head in his hands, pretending to be desperate. "How could I be so naive? Dad, you're sick, vulnerable." "It's only natural that you were fooled," said Victoria, trying to comfort her father. "What do I do now? I've already scheduled the wedding for Friday." "Cancel everything and send that woman away immediately," said Elizabeth. "But what if she already suspects we found out? What if she does something to me?" The two exchanged worried glances, concerned about the possibility. "Dad, you have to report her to the police," suggested Victoria. "Report her for what? She hasn't done anything illegal yet." "But attempted fraud. She didn't ask me for money, didn't sign any documents. Technically, she hasn't committed any crime." Elizabeth slammed her fist on the table. "This is so frustrating. How do these people always get away with it?" "The important thing is, we found out in time," said Victoria. "Now you have to distance yourself from her gradually so as not to raise suspicions." "Or I could confront her directly." "No!" both shouted. "Why not?" "Because she might panic and do something crazy," explained Elizabeth. "What kind of crazy?" "I don't know. Blackmail you, spread lies, try to force the marriage somehow." Howard Reynolds pretended to be scared. "Do you think she's dangerous?" "Dad, a woman who has already killed 2 husbands is very dangerous," said Victoria. "But did the detective say she actually killed them or that they died of natural causes?" The two hesitated. "Well, technically, they died of natural causes. But the circumstances were suspicious," admitted Elizabeth. "What circumstances?" "They were both very rich and much older than her. And she always inherited everything. That doesn't prove she killed them." "Dad, are you defending this woman?" asked Victoria, incredulous. "I'm not defending her. I'm just trying to understand the facts." "The facts are that she lied about being a teacher, lied about never having been married, and has a history of marrying rich, sick men," exploded Elizabeth. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Anthony went to answer and returned with Eleanor, who had arrived for the scheduled meeting. "Howard, darling, I'm here," she said cheerfully, stopping suddenly when she saw the tense expressions on everyone's faces in the room. Eleanor," said Howard, pretending to hesitate. "What?" Eleanor was genuinely confused, as she didn't know that the daughters had discovered her true identity. "We know who you really are," said Victoria, standing up aggressively. Eleanor looked at Howard, asking for explanations with her eyes. "They hired a detective to investigate you," explained Howard. "A detective?" Eleanor seemed genuinely surprised. "Enough with the act," shouted Elizabeth. "We know you're an actress, that you lied about being a teacher, and that you've married 2 rich men before." Eleanor slowly sat down in an armchair, processing the accusations. "Howard, do you believe this?" I don't know what to believe." "Dad, don't fall for her act again," warned Victoria. Eleanor looked at the 2 daughters with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I understand why you're worried about your father." "Don't try to play the victim," said Elizabeth. "I'm not playing the victim. I'm trying to explain." "Then explain why you lied about being a teacher," challenged Victoria. Eleanor took a deep breath. "It's true that I was an actress, but I was also a theatre teacher at several schools. I didn't lie completely." "And the 2 rich husbands?" asked Elizabeth. "I did have 2 husbands, and they did die. But of natural causes after years of happy marriage, and I never married for money." "Then why didn't you tell us about them?" questioned Victoria. "Because it's still painful to talk about it. I lost 2 people I loved very much." Howard observed that Eleanor was genuinely emotional. Either she was an exceptional actress, or she was being sincere. "Eleanor, would you still marry me if I were poor?" he asked. "Of course I would, darling. Money can't buy true companionship." "That's a lie," shouted Elizabeth. "If he were poor, you wouldn't even look at him." "That's not true," Eleanor answered calmly. "Prove it," challenged Victoria. "How can I prove something like that?" "Sign a document giving up any inheritance," suggested Elizabeth. Eleanor looked surprised at Howard. If that's what will put your family at ease, I'll sign." "No," said Howard quickly. "If you sign that, how can I be sure you're not just doing it to impress me?" The daughters were confused by their father's reaction. "Dad, if she signs, it solves all the problems," said Victoria. "It doesn't solve anything. If she signs, I'll always wonder if she really loves me or if she's just pretending to gain my trust." "Howard, darling, I truly love you," said Eleanor, holding his hands. "I know, my love. But my daughters have planted a seed of doubt in my heart. So what do we do?" Howard pretended to be thoughtful for a few moments. "I think we need to call off the wedding." Eleanor began to cry. If she was acting, it was a perfect performance. "If that's what you want," she murmured. "It's not what I want. It's what needs to be done." "Dad, you're making the right decision," said Elizabeth, relieved. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive, Howard. You have to protect your family." Eleanor stood up to leave, but first turned to the two daughters. "I hope you truly love your father and aren't just protecting your inheritance." "How dare you?" exploded Victoria. "Just an observation. Take good care of him. Men like your father are rare." After Eleanor left, the two daughters were euphoric. "Dad, you did the right thing," said Elizabeth. "That woman was really dangerous," added Victoria. "Now I can die in peace, knowing you protected me," said Howard. "Dad, we will always protect you," said Victoria, hugging him. "It's true, we're a family," added Elizabeth. Anthony watched everything with a strange expression on his face. He was beginning to understand the game Howard was playing. "Girls, now that this problem is solved, can you help me with something?" "Of course, Dad, anything. I want to make the most of my last few months. Could you spend more time with me?" The two exchanged a discreet glance. "Of course, Dad. How much time would you like us to spend here?" asked Victoria. "How about we have dinner together every Friday? And maybe you could spend Sundays with me." "Every Friday and every Sunday," repeated Elizabeth with a disguised grimace. "Is it too much time?" "No, Dad. It's just that, well, sometimes we have commitments." "I understand." "How about once a week, then?" "That would be better," agreed Victoria quickly. Howard pretended to be sad. "All right. Once a week is better than nothing." "Dad, don't be sad. It's just that our schedule is very busy," explained Elizabeth. "I know, dear. You have your own lives." In the following days, Howard noticed that his daughters returned to their previous pattern. They occasionally called to ask about his health, but always quickly and superficially. Anthony noticed his boss's growing sadness. "Mr. Howard, do you regret sending Mrs. Eleanor away?" "A little. She really seemed to care about me." "What if she was being sincere?" "Then I made a terrible mistake. But the test with my daughters isn't over yet." "What else do you plan to do?" "I want to do one last test, the most definitive of all." "What kind of test?" "I'll pretend I'm very ill and call them for a final conversation. I want to see if they show genuine sadness or if they just ask about the will." "And then?" "Then I'll reveal the truth about everything, about the fake illness, about Mrs. Eleanor, about all the tests." "How do you think they'll react?" Howard became thoughtful. "I don't know, Anthony. But at least I won't live in ignorance about my daughter's character any longer." The following Friday, Howard put his final plan into action. He called his daughters, pretending to be very weak. "Girls, I need you to come here. Urgently," he said in a faint, halting voice. "Dad, what happened?" asked Victoria, alarmed. "I'm very ill. I think my time has come." "Don't say that, Dad. We're coming right now." An hour later, both arrived in a rush. They found Howard in bed, apparently very weak, with Anthony by his side checking his blood pressure. "Dad, how are you feeling?" asked Elizabeth, approaching the bed. "Very weak. I think I won't make it through the night." The two exchanged worried glances. For the first time in weeks, they seemed genuinely frightened. "Dad, do you want us to call the doctor?" asked Victoria. "It's no use anymore. I want to talk to you." "Of course, Dad. About what?" Howard paused for a long time, as if speaking was difficult. About the will. Their eyes subtly lit up, despite their apparent concern. Dad, you don't need to worry about that now, said Elizabeth. I do need to. I want to make sure everything is in order. Everything is in order, Dad. You already arranged everything with Dr. Williamson, said Victoria. But I changed my mind about some things. The two leaned closer to the bed. What kind of changes, Dad? I want to leave part of the fortune to Anthony. To Anthony, they exclaimed simultaneously. He took care of me when you couldn't. Dad, Anthony is already well paid for his work, said Elizabeth with a sharp tone. It's not a matter of payment, it's gratitude. How much do you intend to leave him? Asked Victoria, trying to control her anger. Half. Half, shouted Elizabeth, completely losing her composure. Dad, that's madness. Anthony is just an employee, protested Victoria. He is more of a son to me than you are. The phrase landed like a bomb in the room. The two fell silent for a few seconds. Dad, how can you say such a thing? Asked Elizabeth with tears in her eyes. Because it's the truth. You only show up here when you want to talk about inheritance. That's not true, protested Victoria. Isn't it? When was the last time you spent an afternoon with me without mentioning money? The two couldn't answer. Dad, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's better we let you rest, said Elizabeth, clearly irritated. You're leaving when I'm dying? That's not it. It's just that you're being unfair to us, said Victoria. Unfair how? Giving half the inheritance to a stranger. Anthony isn't a stranger. He knows me better than you do. Elizabeth stood up abruptly. Dad, you're delirious because of the medication. You can't make important decisions like this. My mind is perfectly clear. Dad, think carefully. Anthony might be manipulating you, suggested Victoria. How dare you, Anthony, never asked me for anything. Dad, men like that are clever. They know how to gain trust, said Elizabeth. Howard looked at his two daughters with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. Do you really think that a simple man like Anthony could manipulate me? Desperate people do anything for money, replied Victoria. Like the two of you. The silence that followed was awkward. The two had been exposed again. Dad, we're not desperate for money, protested Elizabeth. No? Then why does every conversation we have end up being about inheritance? Because we care about your financial security, or because you care about your inheritance? Victoria began to cry, but her tears seemed more of anger than sadness. Dad, that's not fair. We're your daughters. And I am your father, but you have never shown true love for me. How can you say that? Sobbed Elizabeth. Because you only come to me when you want something. Anthony, who was watching everything in silence, was impressed by the coldness of the young ladies. Even seeing their father apparently dying, they could only think about money. Father, if that's how you feel about us, then do whatever you want with your money, said Elizabeth, getting up to leave. You're going to abandon me at the time of my departure. We're not abandoning you. We're leaving before you say more horrible things about us, said Victoria. The only thing horrible here is discovering that my daughters only care about money. The two left the room, slamming the door. Howard heard them talking in the hallway. We have to stop this madness, said Elizabeth. Let's call Dr. Williamson right now, replied Victoria. If he leaves half to Anthony, our inheritance will be much smaller. We need to prove that Dad is not in his right mind to change the will. Howard heard the front door slam and the sound of his daughter's car driving away. He got out of bed and walked to the window. Anthony, I think I've seen enough. Mr. Howard, I'm so sorry. They really only care about money. It's a painful realization, but a necessary one. Now I know exactly what I have to do. What do you intend to do? Tomorrow I will reveal the whole truth, about the fake illness, about all the tests, about everything. And then? Then I will rewrite my will for real, and this time I will leave it to people who truly deserve it. Like who? You, who treated me like a father for 2 years. Mrs. Rose, who has been cooking for me for 15 years. Old Jim, who has been taking care of the garden for 10 years. People who have shown genuine affection. And your daughters. Howard was thoughtful for a few moments. I will leave something for them. I can't deny they are my daughters, but it will be a modest sum, enough for them to live comfortably, but not enough so they don't have to work. Do you think they will learn the lesson? I hope so, Anthony. But if they don't, at least I will have done what I thought was right. The next morning, Howard called his daughters, asking them to come for an important talk. Father, how are you feeling? Asked Victoria, pretending concern. Better, much better. Come here at 2 in the afternoon. Come here at 2. I have something important to reveal. About the will. About many things. At 2 o'clock, the two arrived, accompanied by Dr. Williamson, the family lawyer. Father, we brought Dr. Williamson to clarify some legal questions, said Elizabeth. What questions? About your decisions yesterday. We want to be sure they are within the law, explained Victoria. Howard smiled inwardly. They had really come to prevent the change in the will. Dr. Williamson, it's good to see you. But before we talk about the will, I need to reveal some things to my daughters. What kind of things, Howard? Asked the lawyer. Anthony, can you call Mrs. Eleanor here? Mrs. Eleanor? Asked the surprised daughters. Yes, she is part of the revelation I'm going to make. Minutes later, Eleanor entered the room, greeting everyone politely. Girls, Dr. Williamson, I want you to sit down. What I'm going to tell you might be shocking. Everyone settled into the living room armchairs. Anthony stood near the window. First, I want to reveal that Mrs. Eleanor is indeed an actress, but you are wrong about everything else. What do you mean, Father? Asked Victoria. I hired Eleanor to play the role of a potential new wife. I wanted to test your reactions. You did what? Exclaimed Elizabeth. And there's more. Much more. Howard took a deep breath before continuing. I am not sick. The silence in the room was deafening. How? Asked Dr. Williamson. I don't have any rare disease. I don't have 3 months to live. I'm perfectly healthy. But Dad, shouted both daughters at the same time, I invented this illness to find out if you love me or just care about my inheritance. Victoria stood up furious. You made us go through all this because of a suspicion? It wasn't suspicion, daughter. It was confirmed certainty. Dad, this is terrible. How could you do this to us? Cried Elizabeth. How could you spend weeks talking only about inheritance when you thought I was dying? Both were left speechless. Dr. Williamson, did you know about this farce? Asked Victoria. I didn't know anything, replied the lawyer, still in shock. Dad, this test was cruel and unnecessary, said Elizabeth. It was necessary indeed, and it revealed exactly what I suspected. What did you suspect? That you only care about me when money is involved. That's not true, protested Victoria. No? Then tell me, at any point in the last few weeks, did you ask how I was feeling emotionally? If I was afraid of passing, if I needed support? The two looked at each other, not knowing how to respond. All your conversations revolved around wills, inheritances, power of attorneys, and bank accounts. Dad, we were trying to protect you, said Elizabeth. Protect me from what? From being happy? From being deceived. You investigated Eleanor not to protect me, but to protect your inheritance. Eleanor, who had remained silent until then, decided to speak. May I say something? Of course, Eleanor. Howard, I understand the pain your daughters are feeling right now, but I also understand why you conducted this test. We don't want to hear anything from this actress, said Victoria angrily. I am indeed an actress, but that doesn't mean my feelings aren't genuine. During these weeks, I've grown very fond of your father. Of course. Because of his money, accused Elizabeth. No, because of his kindness. Howard is a special man, regardless of the fortune he has. Dad, how can you trust her more than her? Asked Victoria. because not once did she ask me about money, inheritance, or assets. Unlike you. Dr. Williamson, who was observing everything in silence, decided to intervene. Howard, I understand your disappointment, but your daughters are young and may have acted out of inexperience. Dr. Williamson, they're 32 and 29 years old. They're not children. That's true, but perhaps they deserve a second chance. Howard looked at his daughters, who were visibly shaken. Do you want a second chance? Of course we do, Dad, said Elizabeth quickly. Then prove to me that you truly care about me. How? Spend time with me without talking about money. Show genuine interest in my life, my feelings, my memories. Dad, of course we care about those things, said Victoria. Then when was the last time you asked about my longing for your mother? About how lonely I feel in this big house? About my plans for the future? Both remained silent. You never asked because you never cared. You only care about the assets I'll leave behind when I'm gone. Dad, that's going to change. We promise, said Elizabeth. How can I be sure you're not just promising because you discovered my test? Because we're your daughters, and we love you, answered Victoria. If you love me, why was your first reaction yesterday to worry about me wanting to leave part of the inheritance to Anthony? Because we got jealous, admitted Elizabeth. Jealous of what? Of seeing that you like him more than us. And why do you think I like him more? Because he's always here, taking care of you. And where are you? Dad, we have our lives, our jobs. And I'm not a priority in your lives. The two began to cry for real for the first time. Father, forgive us. We truly failed as daughters, said Victoria between sobs. We behaved terribly, added Elizabeth. Howard felt his heart soften seeing his daughter's genuine tears. Girls, I love you, I always have. But you disappointed me greatly. We can fix this, Father. Please give us a chance, begged Elizabeth. All right, but with conditions. What conditions? For the next 6 months, you'll have to prove you truly care about me. How? By visiting me at least twice a week, talking about things other than money, participating in my life genuinely. And if we manage to do that, asked Victoria, then I'll know I raised you right, even if it's late. And if we don't? Then I'll leave most of the inheritance to people who truly care about me. The two exchanged glances and agreed to the conditions. Father, one question, said Elizabeth. Does the account in Switzerland really exist? Howard smiled. No, it was another test, and you failed miserably. And the suggestion of giving us power of attorney? Another sham. Did you really believe I'd give control of my assets to you after what I witnessed? Dr. Williamson shook his head. Howard, you set up a complex operation just to test your daughters. And it was worth it. Now I know exactly where I stand. Eleanor stood up to leave. Howard, it was a pleasure to be part of this experiment. I hope your family finds happiness. Eleanor, wait. There's something I want to propose. What? I'd like us to be real friends. No acting, no tests. Just two mature people who might get along. I'd love that. Father, are you going to date this woman? Asked Elizabeth. Perhaps, if she wants to and if you accept it without causing trouble. We'll try to accept, said Victoria hesitantly. I don't want you to try. I want you to truly accept if I'm happy with her. All right, Father. In the following months, something extraordinary happened. Victoria and Elizabeth truly changed. They began visiting their father regularly, not to talk about money, but to get to know him better. They discovered stories from his youth they'd never heard before. They learned about his dreams, fears, and hopes. For the first time in years, they talked about Margaret and how she was missed in the family. Anthony observed the transformation with joy. Howard was visibly happier, and the daughters seemed genuinely interested in having a healthy relationship with their father. Eleanor became a constant presence in Howard's life. They didn't marry, but developed a deep friendship that brought joy to both. 6 months later, on a Sunday in October, the family was gathered for lunch at the mansion. For the first time in years, the atmosphere was genuinely harmonious. Father, we want to officially apologize for our behavior, said Victoria. It's true. We were greedy and selfish, added Elizabeth. "And we want to thank you for giving us a second chance," said Victoria. Howard looked at his daughters with pride. "Girls, you proved to me you can change. I'm very proud of you." "Father, what about the will?" asked Elizabeth. Everyone laughed at the question. "Elizabeth," scolded Victoria. "What? I can ask, right?" "You can ask indeed," said Howard, smiling. "I decided to divide everything equally between you two, Anthony, and some people who helped me over the years." "And that seems fair to us," said Victoria. "Very fair," agreed Elizabeth. Anthony, who was serving lunch, became emotional. "Mr. Howard, you don't need to leave me anything. Taking care of you is already a privilege. Anthony, you were more than an employee. You were a true friend when I needed it most." Eleanor, who was sitting beside Howard, held his hand. "Howard, can I say this was one of the most interesting experiences of my acting career?" "How so?" "I'd never played a role that brought a real family back to what it should be." "Dad, we have a proposal," said Victoria. "What proposal?" "How about we organize a family lunch every Sunday?" suggested Elizabeth. "Would you have time for that?" "We'll make time. Family comes first," said Victoria. "And Eleanor is invited too," added Elizabeth. "Really? Really? If she makes Daddy happy, she's welcome in our family." Howard felt tears in his eyes. He finally had the family he'd always dreamed of. "You know, girls, your mother would be proud to see you like this." "We miss her," said Elizabeth. "She always said that one day you'd mature and become the wonderful women you are." "Dad, can we talk about her more often?" asked Victoria. "We want to know more stories about Mom." "Of course, we have a lifetime of stories to share." That afternoon, for the first time in years, the mansion was full of genuine laughter and warm conversations. Howard looked around the table and realized his plan, though painful, had worked. His daughters had learned the value of human relationships. Anthony had officially become part of the family. Eleanor had brought lightness and joy to his life, and he had discovered it's never too late to teach the people we love to truly love. "Anthony, do you think I did the right thing?" asked Howard later when they were alone. "Mr. Howard, you saved your family. Sometimes people need a shock to wake up. It was a big risk. I could have lost my daughters forever. But you gained real daughters for the first time." "That's true. Now they visit me because they want to, not because they need to. And that makes all the difference." Howard looked out the window and saw his daughters in the garden, chatting animatedly with Eleanor. He finally had the peace he'd been searching for so long. 2 years later, Victoria and Elizabeth had become completely different people. Victoria left her job to start a social enterprise, helping elderly people in vulnerable situations. Elizabeth finished her design course and began renovating nursing homes for free. Both married men they met through their volunteer work, men who loved them for their character, not for the money they would inherit. Howard and Eleanor made their union official in a simple wedding, with only family and close friends. The daughters organized the party and were genuinely happy for their father's happiness. "Dad, did you know everything would work out?" asked Elizabeth at the wedding reception. "I didn't know, but I had hoped that you'd find your way back home." "And we did," said Victoria, hugging her father. "We found our way back to real love." End of story. Now tell us, do you think Howard made the right decision by testing his daughters this way? Leave your honest opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.